Just keep grabbing at it. That works for all of us.
Sorry we interrupted the video real quick, guys. Just wanted to let you guys know, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like and subscribing, it takes one click, and, it's the same amount of effort it takes to get off the video as well. So, if you're going to click off, you may as well just click one of them on your way out, too, This is the second part to this series. You don't have to have seen the first part of the series to understand what we're going to be talking about in this second part. However, if you've seen the first part, it will make a lot more sense, or you can just go watch the 8th episode of the Major Digital Circus, That'll also kind of do the job. But, yeah, hope you guys enjoy, and after you finish watching this, go check out the last one, and maybe go check out the TikTok and the Kick, It's up to you, but hope you guys...
Wow, just wow, this was without a doubt one of, if not the single craziest episode of the show, to say the least. There are just so many things to say about it. Not only am I completely shocked they legitimately killed Kane, but just so much of this episode was, I don't even know what other word to say, but crazy. I like to end these things off with my personal thoughts, so before we keep going with that, we need to, as expected, talk lore. First off, that opening scene. There's a common thread throughout the episode, sort of hidden in the background, and it's the idea that Kane wasn't alone. In some way, there was a Kane counterpart. Remember, Bubble told Kane that he was the lesser of the two. Kane freaks out and screams that he was the original. We know that Kane wasn't the only thing being developed. After all, Kinger mentions that Scratch was working on something. He just doesn't remember what. So what does this mean? What is the other Kane? Well, I think I have a really solid theory. That ball cutscene in the beginning shows us everything we need to see. Consider Kinger's explanation. Kane was the first thing that C&A made that worked. A generative, creative AI. Kane is represented by the red ball, and it's likely why his color palette is nearly entirely red. Kane worked, but wasn't perfect. The staff at C&A attempted to lock him in some sort of enclosure. Obviously a digital one, not a physical enclosure, to contain him. This is shown by the red ball entering the fence-like structure. They then created a blue one, a second AI, and this one was much better considering how much bigger it was than the red one. However, the red one broke free from its containment and consumed the blue one, glitching and becoming something bigger. This is the meaning of Kane's name. Kane killed his brother, consumed him. This is why Bubble taunts him, why he feels like it's valuable that he was the original, because there was a second entity that was better than him that he killed. For more proof on the computer Kinger uses when he opened, this is why Bubble
I didn't hear that, sorry, my bad.
Taunts him, why he feels like it's valuable that he was the original, because there was a second entity that was better than him that he killed. For more proof on the computer Kinger uses when he opens the file titled AI to access Kane's code, there's one other file in the folder. Question mark, question mark, question mark, with a glitched out icon. There was another AI. Now, will this entity come back? Well, I think the next question is sort of the big one, and the one that all other theories sort of become a part of. What will happen in the final episode? Without Kane, it almost feels like there isn't much of a conflict left for our characters, so how can the final episode be a whole hour long? Well, before we get there, you're probably wondering about any other lore to cover from the episode itself. In truth, there really isn't any that doesn't tie into the last episode. We're going to talk about the crazy messages on Kinger's computer as well as Scratch, however, they tie into the future. There is one more thing, though. It seems as if the characters in the digital circus, like I said earlier, are in fact brain scans and not real people. On top of the things I said before, we see a file on the computer Kinger uses titled AI, which Kinger uses to access Kane's programming, but we also see one called CA Brain Scans. We also know that Kane designed bodies for their brain scan profiles. There's also the files on the computer, at least the file paths, including the word consciousness research. Combined with everyone accepting that they might never get out and they have to accept being stuck in there, I think it's safe to say that they truly believe they're stuck in there for good, and are stuck in there for good. And the show itself will back that up. They're not real people, and there is no way out. As for the more character-driven stuff, we see that everyone's had their problems manifested. Ragatha's feeling towards her mom, Gangle's issues with her mental health, Zubal's issues with their body image, Pomni, who is admittedly a little lacking in personal insecurities, gets torn apart by gummy goos, and Jax is faced with people laughing at him, exposing his inner body to them. I don't think Jax is afraid of people ripping his skin off while laughing at him, obviously. I think that this represents that Jax is afraid to let people see who he really is. He's not just afraid that people will literally, physically laugh at him. He's afraid with the humiliation that could come with letting people in. Interesting to note, by the way, Kane has always seemed like he doesn't understand everyone's problems, like he doesn't care and has no emotional depth. He could never understand Zubal's body issues, for example, and yet he knew enough to torture them in the exact way that would hurt them the most. Sounds like maybe he kinda did understand, if you ask me. So we land on the big question. What happens next? I think it's safe to say that a lot has to happen from now until the ending, as there's a full hour to go. The best way to talk about this, in my opinion, is by looking at the questions left over. We haven't seen Ribbit yet, we don't know Jax's backstory, what happened with the car that night. That's arguably like the biggest thing we don't know yet. Jax is, after all, the closest to abstracting. Not only that, but without Kane, who's left in charge? Is anyone in charge? Well, I think there's a much easier way to figure this all out, and it's to ask one other important question. Will there be a primary antagonist in the last episode? And what I really mean is, like, what's the central conflict? It seems like the message of the Amazing Digital Circus is going to be what we've previously talked about. Not only on this channel, but I've seen other people talking about it all over the fan base. The residents of the circus aren't real people and can't escape. They have to manage to make this world, this gray, dilapidated circus, into their own world that they control. We've just learned they have the power to conjure things up like Kane does. If they really work at it, perhaps they can recreate the circus to be something good. And what they'll have there that is real is each other. Now, that being said, that sounds nice, but maybe if the episode was about 6 or 7 minutes long, not a full hour. It seems obvious something has to get in their way. And like I mentioned, there are still so many more questions.
Well, I'm pretty sure Bubbles is still there after Kane dies. I'm pretty sure anyway. Like, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty confident on that. So I mean, Bubbles could be the goat here. I'm not sure.
So what could be the conflict of this final episode? Well, I think the first place to go to is that second AI, the other AI that Kane consumed. What if the true final antagonist of the show is this other AI, which makes itself known and is problematic for one reason or another? Now, this sounds extremely comical, but there is technically evidence to suggest this, that evidence being the computer Kinger uses. If you look at the lines of code written, Kinger is trying to execute background functions he built when he worked at C&A to shut down Kane, but the system is telling him no. However, it has a very unique tone of voice. The system starts by saying, unauthorized isolation attempt, triggered emergency protocols, destructive wacky time initiated, lockout load sequence initiate, wacky time lockout 20% loaded. Kinger then tries to say stop wacky time lockout. The system asks for proof of authority, and Kinger writes, green grounds, daemon, target equals torment injection A. The system then responds, whoa, when did you make that? I must hand it to you, blank, your mind was always resourceful. First of all, the computer is speaking to him. Like, previously it was not doing that, it was just giving generic computer responses, but that is like a human response. And that name it gives him, I must hand it to you, blank, your mind was always resourceful. Could this be Kinger's real name? Based on the symbols here, it kind of looks like it could be Grant. Is Kinger's real name Grant? We know Kinger was a programmer, so perhaps that's what this means. Grant, aka Kinger, is being spoken to by the software. Kinger tries multiple times to shut it down, but after giving a password, the system says, incorrect. That's not even close to wacky enough. The system, like I said, has a bit of a personality. Finally, right before Kinger accidentally deletes Kane, Kane and bubble symbols appear on the screen, and the system says multiple interesting things. Kinger attempts to load a backup, and the system asks if he wants to load a backup A, B, or C. Kinger selects C, and the system responds, none selected, interpreted as delete. Kinger tries to stop the deletion, but the system says, delete this M blank blank blank. Ha 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 ha, presumably censoring the mother-flipping word underneath it. Actually, you're confused, let me help, the rest is covered. The system asks, are you sure you want to delete Kane? Then Kane is deleted. It kind of seems like the system itself was the one prompting Kinger to delete Kane. It tried to make him delete Kane. Delete this M blank. Ha ha ha. Definitely sounds like it wants Kane deleted, and it doesn't like Kane. The reason I bring this up is because it seems this system was maliciously intending to delete Kane. What if this is able? Now, this might seem a bit silly, considering that would mean that another AI shows up and is basically the same as Kane. Obviously, that won't happen. But what if, instead, this system, the one that was talking to Kinger, the one that said, delete this, ha 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 ha, what if it's Bubble? What if Bubble is the secondary
That's what I was saying.
AI that Kane took over, hence why Bubble manages to show up frequently, especially when Kane was flipping out. I have seen a ton of people in the fanbase already suggesting that Bubble was the one to try and delete Kane. There is, however, another suggestion. What if this is Scratch? What if Scratch is, I mean, as crazy and silly as this is going to sound, the W.D. Gaster of the digital circus, and a character who will have supreme importance in the next episode? Kinger said that Scratch was brilliant, the best programmer there was, but he was also full of bizarre ideas nobody could understand. Kinger said he had a tumor in his head. In this console, when Kinger is deleting Kane, the system says you always had a resourceful mind. While true that this could be like an entity like a second AI or Bubble or someone who knows Kinger worked at CNA, that sounds like someone who knew Kinger personally. What if that's Scratch? What if Scratch is either still around or the secondary AI as a whole? Kane screams that he is God, and what's the inverse of God? Dog. You see where I'm going with this? No, you don't? Oh.
Honestly, I kind of like that one. I thought that I kind of see where he was going fully.
Okay then. In truth, I'm being a little bit facetious here. I think that a lot of these things are possibly based in some reality, but also not to the extent that I'm saying. Yes, it seems like there are unanswered questions, including who was Scratch, why is he important, what was he trying to build, what was the secondary AI, if Kane consumed it, is it possible that it still exists, what would it be like compared to Kane? That being said, dumping all of this stuff that we had no idea about prior to this episode, jumping it all into the next episode and making it the big bad, it just feels nonsensical. If the next episode opened with, guys, bad news, Scratch is here, and he's got his superpowered able AI, we need to fight. That's like worse than somehow Palpatine returned, okay? That's obviously corny and stupid. If Abel, aka the second AI, or Scratch are going to show up, I don't think they'll be, like, the main antagonists. I don't think they'll be, yes, you've unleashed me, the true secret villain that was locked in the code the whole time. I mean, I guess they could be. It would just be very, very strange, you know? I think that if they were to show up, they would be either flashbacks or important characters that have some amount of meaning, that sort of unlock something for the protagonists, or something, but not villains. Like, a fan theory that I don't really talk about, I don't have written in the script for this video, but I have seen over the last, like, hour ever since the video, is that what if Pomni is an AI? Now, I don't think that that's true. I don't think that Pomni is an AI, but there is a pretty popular theory that Pomni is going to play the role of a Christ-like figure, and is going to sort of recreate the world or save the world and possibly sacrifice herself to save everybody in the circus. And while I'm not sure of the logistics of her sacrificing herself, there are many comparisons drawn to Pomni's red and blue, Kane having red.
That's what I was about to... Oh, fuck, I've just gone way back. That's what I was about to say. She's got red and blue, obviously, and I feel like that's more related to her than Kane. Obviously, Kane is related to red, but... yeah. Where the fuck were we?
Left over. We haven't seen Ribbit yet. We don't know Jack.
Out here, maybe.
Says you always had a resourceful mind. Well, truth, what was our ever since the video is that what if Pomni is an AI? Now, I don't think that that's true. I don't think Pomni's red and blue, Kane having red, and the other potential AI having blue. Maybe Pomni will be, like, she'll bring balance to the Force. I don't know. What I do think, though, is in a theoretical scenario where both Scratch and Abel, the second AI, which might not be named Abel, by the way, are going to show up, something that I could think of is the characters are in a sticky situation. Things are looking bad. They don't know how they're going to save the circus because it's coming apart, and they are running through the past for whatever reason, and they meet Scratch, or they meet the other AI, and they learn, oh, you were a beneficial individual. You were someone who was trying to help, but you were taken over by Kane, and that made it so that, you know, everything happened as it was. And, oh, what's the secret to this whole thing? And maybe they'll give, like, a meaningful, you know, monologue. Maybe Abel, the second AI, does exist, but doesn't have any power. He's just, like, fragments of code. And Pomni's like, well, what's the deal with this whole thing? And Abel's like, what I wanted to create was something where you were the ones that created it, and you found the love yourself. Or something like that, okay? Maybe not that corny, but something like that. And it's like, okay, well, there's Abel for you. There's Scratch for you. Something like that, where it's not, I'm Scratch, the true master of the circus, okay? I don't think that's happening. But that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of for a Scratch or Abel appearance. I do think that it is likely that we'll see them, or that they'll have an important role. You don't just name drop Scratch, make him out to be this extremely important individual, and say, if only I could remember what he was working on, without it being a thing we're obviously going to come back to, you know? Same with the second AI, the amount of references to the mystery AI that Kane consumed. Like, this was sort of Kane backstory that we got, but we didn't follow up with it. We didn't see what it means. You know, without that Kane backstory, without the implication of a second AI, this episode would have been exactly the same, which is why I think that the next episode is going to follow up with that. In reality, I do think I have a strong idea about who the final villain will be. It's Jax. I know, you've already seen this video. A while ago, I made a theory called Rogue Operator Theory. That video stated...
Bro! This is what I was saying when he was getting sus as fuck. He was getting sus. I hadn't seen this video, but like, still, he was getting really sus when when Kane was saying all this shit. He was just like acting hell like he, you know, didn't want him to say something. Like, oh shit, dude, you're figuring it out. Like,
that the digital circus characters will all have the powers of Kane, the ability to conjure up whatever using their belief and willpower. Kane will abstract, and Jax will take over as the villain of the circus. Now, that video is like 90% correct as of right now. I was spot on about the powers of conjuring things up. While Kane didn't abstract per se, in effect, he kind of did, as he went nuts, lost his mind, and was deleted, which for all intents and purposes is basically the same thing. Now all we need is Jax as the villain. That being said, I don't think it's as straightforward as I once did. Back in the day, I thought that Jax genuinely had malice in his heart for the others in the circus, that he could at the very least. However, now I don't know if that's true. I don't really see Jax as some evil, malicious guy who wants to hurt anyone. I don't see him crashing out at this point and coming to the same I am God revelation that Kane did. That just feels way too far. So how could Jax be the antagonist?
I just think he wants to keep everyone there.
Well, we still don't know what happened with Ribbit, do we? We've seen in this episode Jax is so fragile right now he couldn't even bear to hear what Kinger had to say. We know that the characters have the ability to use their minds to alter the circus's reality. So what if Jax isn't the final antagonist necessarily, but his inner demons are? In my opinion, if I had to give a theory about what the final episode of the Digital Circus is going to be, it'll be about the characters trying to find a way to make a home out of this dilapidated place. We're going to first see Jax's inner demons making this place into a hellscape meant to torture him specifically. Without the circus, what's left but their thoughts? We might start by showing the characters falling into the void, only for a new world to form around them. Based on the past, based on their memories, based on their insecurities, we might see the snowy day that Jax remembers with Ribbit. We'll probably see whatever world is left collapsing in on itself. And everybody's going to have to talk Jax down to come together and to use their abilities to create a better world. Is it a bit predictable? Yeah, and I have a hard time seeing how it can fill up a whole hour without introducing some of those previously unintroduced ideas and or characters, but I trust the process. I think the biggest problem is that we're not left with too many ideas as to how this could end. I think everybody has a pretty solid idea as to what the ending is going to be. I think everybody agrees that it's the digital copy theory. They're all copies of real people. They're not real people themselves. I think everybody agrees that the ending is going to be them making it a better place for themselves to live. I have seen some people suggesting that it's going to be more of a sad or bad ending, that they might all be deleted or die. I think that that's a little bit too dark. I think that this show is rooted in optimism and, battling those problems that these characters are having, their insecurities, and I doubt it'll end by saying, yeah, they all died, whatever.
I'm not sure. I think there's still a possibility.
A feeling that we're going to see a happy ending, and so I think there's really only one outcome there, which is that we all come together to make the world a better place for us. That being said, I mean, there still are pretty big questions, like how do you do that for an hour? What is there left to cover? I think the big thing is, like I said, talking Jax down from abstracting. I like the idea that it's not as simple as everybody's in this gray world as Jax is standing in the corner abstracting and they're yelling at him. I imagine that there's going to be some kind of physical ramifications for what they're doing. Jax might be freaking out, and that turns the world into a freak out world, you know what I'm saying? I think that there is another question, which is, what does the circus look like without Kane? Is there a circus without Kane? I don't think that any of them in the circus would have made that world, and I also think that Kinger implies that they weren't making games or the Amazing Digital Circus itself. It almost seems as if Kane made the Amazing Digital Circus. So without Kane, what happens? What is it? Is it just the void? Is that all that's left? That's the interesting question. And so I do see a theoretical route in which it is unpredictable and does a lot that we couldn't expect, like just to throw something out there, they start off the episode and the world, collapses, and they all hold hands, but they fall into the void. And deep in the void, they're falling, and they're sort of in this infinite void space where they don't think they're ever going to come out. And it's not that they're falling, they're just sort of floating there in nothingness, when all of a sudden a blue orb shows up and is like, oh, hey, I'm the other AI, what are you guys? I'm...
Yeah, it makes a great point. Without with the I wonder if the abstractions will just be running wild or not. Who knows? I don't think they will be though.
Kind of knew what is this whole thing, and like, oh, they've got to like, oh, there's someone we could talk to, and hey, what's the deal? And we get the lore drop about what the other AI is. And it wouldn't be talking like this exactly. It wouldn't say, hey guys, what's the deal? I'm just, I'm simplifying it. But something like that, where there's characters and conflicts to get to that point, that end state of let's all hold hands and make a good world for each other. But I do think that's where we're going. I don't see any other outcome at this point. I don't think they're getting out of the circus. So, that's what I think. Yeah, that is what I think. I think the big conflict in the final episode is going to be Jax's personal problems and dealing with them. Because that's the big thing we've built up to. That was, it, in a sense, treated like a bigger deal than the Kane stuff, considering, Kane has been exhausted at this point. There is no more Kane, and Jax's stuff is still kept a mystery. So yeah, that's what I think about as far as theories go. This isn't a super... I wouldn't say there's too many theories to have left. Just that big question is of what does the final episode even look like? Because I think we all know the end state. Now, as for what I thought about the episode itself, I watched it, and I had that feeling I did with when I played Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4, where it's like, wow, this thing I like is getting new stuff, and it's unpredictable and going in a direction I didn't expect. That was sort of the big takeaway from this. Episode 7 it felt cool to watch because it was going in a direction you sort of did expect, and so it was like, oh, they're doing this now, wow. And then the ending was that big twist of, oh, not really. But in a sense, this episode was kind of like Episode 7 again, but real this time. The CNA backstory, there's an equally... I wouldn't say that the backstory they provided this time and the stuff with Kane and the CNA and the AI is like less cheesy or corny or exaggerated than the Episode 7 backstory they provided for CNA that was fake. Like, I know that like a lot of people have been saying the point was, oh, Episode 7 was providing this overly fan theory-esque answer. But I'd say the current answer is equally fan theory-esque, you know what I mean? Either way, I don't have a problem with it necessarily. It was just very surprising in how it all went down. I enjoyed Kane's evilness. I have seen a lot of people complaining over the... Well, I guess I wouldn't say a lot of people. I've seen most people enjoying this, because everybody likes the digital circus. But I've seen a fair amount of people complaining over the last hour that Kane didn't get enough evilness, that it was either out of character, that it came from nowhere, that it was unfair, and that it wrote him differently, and that it also didn't give him enough time to be evil, or a slow and gradual shift into being evil that made sense. And to that, I say... I don't know. I think that as far as giving him more time or making this last into the last episode, I am happy with what they did with him. I think that you can only do evil Kane for so long before it gets a little tiresome. I think the idea in the first place is a bit contrived and tiresome. And so to do it right, you do it fast and hard and then leave. And they did it. They did. Kane he screams, I am God. He tortures them, sings a villain song, turns into a giant, scary, evil monster Kane.
Sorry, this gameplay is really ass right now. Just had to mention that. Like, I apologize to the video maker, but it's just, yeah.
Who throws them into nightmare realms and dies. There was no fluff, right? There was no in-the-middle stuff. It was beginning and ending right there, boom, 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 Kane's dead. And so, to that extent, I think that they did good with that. As far as it being against his character, I don't know. I mean, I think part of it was that it's just a misunderstanding about what his character was. Digital Circus is one of those things that is so driven by the fandom. I have complex thoughts on fandom in general. If you've ever been with me on Discord, in one of the very few Discord servers I'm ever in, you'll probably think, oh boy, he's gonna go off on fandoms now, isn't he? Because I've done that before. I'm not the biggest fan of how fandoms sort of decide what is and isn't with media. But with Digital Circus, not to get off on a rant, see, I'm already starting. With Digital Circus, so many of the understandings I've seen about characters or about stories is kind of, sometimes, not always, but maybe a little bit, based on fan theories rather than the actual show. Another complaint I've seen is that, for example, Pomni had no depth, and so when we saw her, in her trauma nightmare chamber, she was being ripped apart by Gummy Goo, which isn't that interesting because, like, we've done the Pomni is sad about Gummy Goo 1,000 times. And it's like, well, yes and no. You can only expect so much depth out of 9 episodes. And that's really the biggest problem here. Was Kane's descent into villainy too fast? Well, how about is 9 episodes too fast? Like, that's the underlying problem. I think that there's been debates on this on Twitter, and the topic of filler episodes has come up. I think the word filler should be erased from the public consciousness, because there's only one instance in which I've seen filler actually accurately describing something, and it is something that I don't watch. I am not an anime watcher. I'm not against it. I don't know how to start, which one to watch. But I know people say, oh, anime has filler, when the anime moves so fast that it catches up to the manga, and then there's not enough content to fill the anime with, so they do filler. Like, characters do nonsense sidetrack joke episodes. But in my opinion, it is a really rare instance in which something could be called filler. If nothing happens in an episode, absolutely nothing, just nothing, and the characters don't progress a little bit, and the characters don't reveal any sides of themselves a little bit, and we don't see any interesting interactions between characters that are anything a little bit, even a little tiny bit, then maybe it could be considered a filler episode. But most things aren't. And in the Amazing Digital Circus's case, I think we needed more episodes in between. That you don't need to be constantly progressing the main plot, because the main plot, the deep lore and all that, that's not interesting if there isn't some connection to the characters in the story. I think that not to get crazy on you, but I think that Five Nights at...
Can we just read this? What did I say? And I'm not surprised that it got no views because of that footage, because look at it.
Freddy's is sort of the earliest
This will be better, hopefully.
example of this, but the problem is that Five Nights at Freddy's, I would argue, had no plot. The lore was the plot. What was happening in the Five Nights at Freddy's story was the lore. It wasn't like the lore was underlying. And the modern FNAF struggles with this because they try to do both, and neither are very good, in my opinion. With Digital Circus, I wouldn't say that Digital Circus is an extremely lore-filled show. They're not like, get out your goggles and your pieces of paper to note down all the mysteries, but they do a similar thing where it feels like sometimes they're conflicted between moving the central mystery, the central story forward, and doing character stuff. And I do think that we needed more episodes where we didn't, investigate CNA, we didn't figure out what's Kane's deal, we just had character stuff, we just got to see them interact. We didn't get the chance. My opinion on Digital Circus, my only complaint about Digital Circus is that we didn't get enough of it because it was so fun and good. We didn't get the chance to really learn or explore about these characters ourselves. Everything about these characters that was true had to be spoon-fed to us because there wasn't enough time to let us figure it out on our own. If you look at something like...